Welcome to Endurance Strong. Here we continue our deep dive into training zones for endurance athletes. Enjoy. With Zone 4, we literally cross the threshold into a new physiological system that we are targeting. With Zone 4 training, we are working to raise our lactate threshold. As we gradually exercise harder and harder, we start to build up lactate and hydrogen ions as byproducts of breaking down glucose to produce energy. The lactate is recycled to form more glucose, or energy, but the hydrogen ions decrease the pH of the working muscle, causing acidosis, which can interfere with muscle contraction. This acidosis in your working muscles is the burning sensation you get in your muscles when working hard. The harder you work, the more this cycle occurs, and the more your muscles will burn and tell you to stop until ultimately you do stop. Note, I will just refer to lactate being produced here for simplicity, but hydrogen ions are being produced too. Lactate is produced in a fairly linear fashion as you continue to work harder and harder until a point where it begins to increase exponentially. This point is called your lactate threshold. This occurs because as your body creates lactate, it is able to remove it from the working muscles, but at a certain point you create more than your body is able to keep up with, and it starts to build up. This lactate threshold is where you create as much lactate as you remove, and is important as it is a key determinant of your endurance ability. Since your ability to exercise above this threshold is limited, raising this level of the threshold is clearly quite important. The best way to determine where your lactate threshold is by performing a functional threshold test, which can be done for running, cycling, and swimming. The exact protocols and more details on this can be found elsewhere, but the test will result in you knowing the maximum cycling power, running/swimming pace, and or heart rates you could sustain for approximately an hour of that particular sport. This is known as your functional threshold and approximates your lactate threshold. It is essentially the power, pace, or heart rate you can produce before lactate starts its exponential rise in your working muscles. If you try to work harder than this threshold, you will not be able to maintain it for longer than an hour. And if you work easier, you will be able to maintain it for longer than an hour. Training in Zone 4 and improving your functional threshold is fairly simple. Spending time in this specific zone gets your body used to dealing with more lactate and improves your body's ability to remove and recycle it. Since you can tolerate it better, your threshold moves up, and you can work harder before you hit it. Working harder and fatiguing less is obviously beneficial to your performance. While in theory we could spend around 60 minutes in Zone 4, this is a very hard workout mentally and physically, so it's not really practical. The better way to utilize Zone 4 training is medium length intervals, usually between 8 and 20 minutes. Recovery between intervals should be slightly longer, 5 to 10 minutes, for the harder, high Zone 4 intervals, and slightly shorter, around 4 to 6 minutes, for the easier low Zone 4 intervals. The intensities for Zone 4 for each sport, for functional threshold pace and power, functional threshold heart rate, and rate of perceived exertion, are shown here for those of you watching the video. For those listening to the podcast, it will be on the corresponding article on EnduranceStrong.com. There are benefits to performing slightly longer intervals, around 20 minutes, at a lower end of Zone 4, just at or below your threshold, as you accumulate more time where you're flooding your body with lower amounts of lactate over a longer time. There are also benefits to performing shorter intervals, around 8 minutes, at the higher end of Zone 4, just above your threshold, where you are flooding your body with higher amounts of lactate over a shorter time. There are also some benefits to crisscross workouts, where you spend some time slightly below your threshold and sometimes slightly above, and alternating between the two to get your body used to small bursts of lactate without ever completely stopping its production during the easier efforts. There are countless other ways to structure these workouts, which can all be beneficial, but these are the basic principles for these workouts. There are a few other logistical considerations for these intervals that I should mention. These intervals are on the longer side, and the training zone is somewhat narrow, so it can be difficult to do these to perfection, especially if you're tired from that day or from previous training, or for other reasons. So first off, just try to do your best to perform them to the best of your ability. Spending 80% of the interval actually in zone 4 is fine if that is the best you can do and is better than abandoning them altogether. Second, set yourself up for success with these intervals. Ideally, pick a route that is fairly flat or has only a few uphills or downhills that can make it tough to stay in the zone. A long gradual climb may be a good option as well. Also, pick a route that doesn't have too many stop lights or stop signs that can interrupt the interval midway. You can cover a lot of ground going this hard for this long, so plan accordingly. Continue learning about Zone 5 in the video here.